Hi, everyone. It is so great to be coming into lecture 4 today of our Stay Well and Calm in the midst of the COVID-19 storm series. I want to wish everybody well. I hope you and your families are able to cope well with the current situation. Very importantly, though, I want to thank all of you because you have been great at completing the post-evaluation surveys. We are getting so many positive responses about this series. In fact, so many great suggestions that we are going to start planning a Stay Well and Calm Phase 2 series so we can continue to bring you awesome evidence-based tactics by experts. So with that, I have the pleasure of introducing two of my fabulous faculty, Doctors Teall and Kim Joo, who's going to give you great tips for how to sleep soundly during this pandemic.
Thank you, Bern Milnick. I really appreciate that you're kicking us off, and welcome everyone to this webinar, Sleeping Soundly During the COVID Pandemic, You Can Do It. And as Dr. Milnick just explained, is that those of you who have been joining us, this is the 4th of our webinar series. My hope is that you are finding that each of these things, whether it was when we discussed cognitive behavioral skills building, or staying physically active, or being mindful, or even today with the sleeping tips, that these really are helping you with your goal of staying calm and well in the midst of this pandemic. Specifically last week, we talked about the importance of being mindful and being present. Some of the skills discussed listed on this slide include finding space in your day to practice mindfulness, preparing yourself, especially if you are new at these type of techniques, preparing yourself that if you're being mindful and taking that time to practice this, that your mind might wander, and it's okay to just keep coming back to your focus. That as a part of mindfulness, it's important to bring your heart with tenderness and compassion, and to forgive yourself and recognize that really there are no expectations with how your practice unfolds. Dr. Tucker last week also encouraged us to thank ourselves for finding time for self-care and growth, and finding a support person if you desire. So with that in mind, I would like to thank you for taking the time today to again take some time to really think through what are the things that I can do to be here and now and be well despite all of the stressors that we might be experiencing. So in preparing for today's webinar, I did review the evidence as discussed on Twitter. I'm wondering if you can relate to this 4:30 a.m. post. Have you ever laid in your bed after a whole night of insomnia, patiently waiting for a reasonable hour to have breakfast? I certainly can relate to that. There is someone that I follow on Twitter who regularly posts in the middle of the night to just do what I call a check-in. He posted this on the 23rd of April. It's almost 4 a.m. Eastern Time. Who else is up? And almost immediately, this tweet had 1,000 likes. So that tells us something. Some of the responses included these: I just want to sleep. We don't really have to sleep if we don't do anything all day, do we? My sleeping pattern will never be the same. Who sleeps? I've been up since 2:30. In New York City, looked out my window to see a guy in scrubs and a mask getting on a city bike, going to work. It was beautiful and surreal. And I think these are the kind of, when I read these tweets, it's so easy for me to relate to the fact that sometimes it just, all of this feels just so unreal, so surreal, so dystopian. The very same day that that Twitter conversation was going on, NPR posted the results of a study about how this influx of difficult news and fears are not only affecting our sleep pattern, but they're also producing some very bizarre quarantine dreams, which led to a whole nother Twitter of, let's just say, quite a few more Twitter posts. But if it's you who has been having those dreams or having difficulty falling asleep or overthinking regarding your own sleep, what Kim Joo and I would like you to know is you are not alone. There are so many challenges to sleep during this pandemic. The disruption of our daily life, anxiety, increased stress, isolation, even excess screen time. We know light from a screen affects melatonin production, and it tells our brain that it's daytime. It disrupts our internal clock, as do all of these stressors, and they add to this general category of what we call insomnia. So insomnia can mean trouble falling asleep. It can mean trouble staying asleep. It might mean that every hour or two you're like, oh my gosh, it's 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m., you're watching the clock. It can also mean for some of us who fall asleep and stay asleep, but then wake up at 3 in the morning, that trouble falling back to sleep can also be how this is expressed. To me, this is a really interesting statistic. From January of 2020, before the pandemic, a large national survey found that 46% of adults do not get enough sleep. The recommended amount of sleep for adults is 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night, and that the truth is 10 hours a night might be appropriate. The important thing with that is to know that the last 2 hours of sleep are when we get the most deep sleep and the most restorative sleep. So I have some good news and bad news for you. I'm going to start with the bad news, and it's really kind of alarming, the problems that can happen from lack of sleep. Because of the impact on the endocrine system and on the immune system, not only do we maybe have daytime tiredness or sleepiness or irritable mood, but we actually see changes in the brain's ability to function and in risks for disease. So the cognitive changes that we see are difficulty with paying attention, concentrating, difficulties with memory and learning, impaired judgment, even higher rates of accidents and errors related to insufficient sleep. Lack of sleep is a factor in developing heart disease, hypertension, and stroke. It's also correlated with increased hunger and weight gain. So it's a factor in the development of obesity and diabetes. So if you have these problems already and then you lack sleep, it can exacerbate these. We also see libido loss, quicker aging, and depression associated with insufficient sleep. So now the good news. There's wonderfully good news of things that happen when you sleep soundly. So it's not just that you're avoiding the problems, it's that you actually can boost your immune system and reduce stress and help your brain to function if you get sufficient sleep. So sufficient sleep allows your body to repair and restore down to the cellular level. So adequate sleep boosts your immune system, enhances your well-being, supports your brain function, even boosts fertility and stimulates weight loss. Because it reduces inflammation and improves heart disease, the person who regularly gets adequate sleep, the research tells us that they live 10 years longer than the person who gets inadequate sleep. Now, I don't want that to disrupt your sleep, because what we know is there are things you can do to improve your sleep. We tell our students that sleep is your superpower. And I don't know if any of you have seen the TED Talk by Matt Walker, but it is amazing, and I would highly recommend it. And he goes through these important things that can happen as a result of good sleep. Now, in this video that's going to start here in just a second, there is no sound, but I want you to think about how for some of you, inadequate sleep or insomnia might be a new problem. For some of you, you may have actually experienced this since childhood. And we know with children that sometimes their body just tells them it is time, right? To just fall asleep wherever they are. For children, actually, sleep plays an important role developmentally. Interesting to me is in that same study that found out adults lack sleep, they found out that more than 40% of adults have fallen asleep at work or during the day, just like these children are. So what I would like you to do now is just take a couple deep breaths, and we're going to talk about what can be done to improve our sleep. Sleep it's the best meditation. Meditation can help us with transition to sleep, and sleep itself allows restorative properties, just as we talked about with mindfulness last week. So now Kim Joo is going to discuss this sleep, how it's important to clinicians, as well as some tips for improving your sleep during this pandemic.
Thanks, Alice. So now that we've all decided that we really need to improve the amount of sleep in our lives because we want to live 10 years longer, we have some really good ideas to help you along, especially during this crazy time of pandemic, to help you get more hours of really quality sleep. So I wanted to start with pointing something out here. I'm sure many of you are very aware of the increasing numbers of healthcare provider burnout. We've all seen this in the recent news. While there I'm sure are many reasons for this, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine has recognized that sleep deprivation is a major cause of burnout. And here's their position statement. Sleep deprivation due to shift work schedules, high workload, long hours, sleep interruptions, and insufficient recovery sleep have been implicated in the genesis and the perpetuation of burnout. And I think this is really, really important for us, especially those of you that are listening that are healthcare providers. We really need to take good care of ourselves, and we need to take and be very, very protective of our sleep. So now I'm going to start with some really good quick sleep tips, and I'm really hoping that you might pick one or two tips from each slide, something that you can incorporate into your own routines. So first we're going to talk about what on earth can we do during the daytime to help us sleep better. And the first thing I wanted to talk to you about is routine. It is really important to keep a consistent routine when you talk about when you're going to sleep and also when you're waking up in the morning. So consistency is the key. Consistent sleep patterns help to regulate our body's internal clocks. How many of you guys look forward to daylight savings every year? Whether it be spring forward or fall back, I don't know about you, but that 1 hour change in our time schedule has me tired for 1 to 2 weeks. It takes me a couple of weeks before my internal body clock gets used to that new time frame. So on the weekend, I know a lot of us like to sleep in, but I would encourage you, if you feel like you need to sleep in on the weekend, make it only an hour. Set your alarm for 1 hour later. That way it doesn't really disrupt your body's clock. Number 2 is move. Now, when I talk about exercising regularly, I'm really talking about vigorous exercise here for at least 30 minutes. If you exercise vigorously for 30 minutes a day, that can really help improve your sleep. But if you can't exercise vigorously, Even light exercise is better than none, so keep that in mind. The next topic is eating, one of my favorite things to do. So I want to encourage you to maintain a healthy diet during this pandemic. I know it's very easy to turn to stress eating. However, this is going to affect your sleep. You need to eat the right foods in the right amounts at the right time of the day. So when you're thinking, I know a lot of Americans, we have a favorite pastime of eating our biggest meal at nighttime, right before we go to bed. I would encourage you to move your biggest meal to during the daytime, maybe at lunchtime, and then eating a lighter dinner. We all know that eating a really big, heavy meal right before we go to sleep can often cause us an upset stomach, which can keep us awake for hours. And then another one of my favorites is naps. I wish I had more time to nap. I'll bet a lot of you wish that too. Make sure you limit your daytime naps to 30 minutes at a time and to no later than 4 p.m. in the afternoon. A great power nap can be really, really helpful, especially if you haven't gotten enough sleep the night before or if you've had a really busy, stressful day. I encourage you to put your mobile phone on silent when you decide to take a little power nap and to also set your alarm. I typically take about 5 minutes to fall asleep. So what I will do, personally, I will set my alarm for 35 minutes. That way I'm sure that I'll have a few minutes to fall asleep and then I'll get a good quality 30-minute nap in. Here are some tips that you can do in the evening. So Alice has already mentioned being in front of screens with bright lights can really interfere with your natural circadian rhythms. So make sure you're limiting your exposure to bright lights. And I encourage you, if you are going to be in front of a screen, then turn the brightness down on your screen. Once again, I had mentioned earlier, try to avoid eating heavy meals, especially spicy meals late in the evening. They can really cause some serious indigestion or acid reflux or heartburn. It's a really good idea if you're hungry in the evening, just eat a light snack about 45 minutes before you go to bed. Now there's lots of advice on drinking, lots of advice. So the first piece of advice is to watch your caffeine intake. Avoid drinking caffeine late in the afternoon or evening. Now this is going to be very different for a lot of folks out there. The recommendations are typically not to drink caffeine past 4 or 5 in the evening. However, I know many people that can drink caffeine as late as 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night and have no problem at all falling asleep and staying asleep. But then again, I know other people that are very sensitive to caffeine. So if you're a person that's extremely sensitive to caffeine, keep an eye on when you're drinking it. Some friends I know can't drink caffeine past noon or it keeps them up at night. So just be really cognizant of how caffeine affects you, how much you're drinking, and how late you're drinking it. Now, we all like to consume an alcoholic beverage or a festive beverage in the evening, but I really encourage you to avoid consuming alcohol right before bedtime. You might want to put it more towards your dinner meal. Unfortunately, alcohol sometimes will initially help you fall asleep, but as it wears off, oftentimes you'll wake up hours later and then have a sleepless night. So be really careful with how much, how often, and also what time you're drinking alcohol before you go to bed. And then the last reminder for drinking is to reduce your fluid intake right before you go to bed. Now, unfortunately, some of you guys out there are prone to taking those nocturnal visits to the restroom. I don't know anyone who enjoys the need for a biological break in the middle of the night, because a lot of times it's very difficult to fall back asleep. So if you happen to be prone to having to get up for a little biological break in the middle of the evening or in the middle of the night as you're sleeping, just watch your intake and try to drink a little bit less after dinner. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about for the evening is keeping a journal. So I highly recommend keeping a pen and a notebook right beside your bed. Right beside your bed. Practice the habit of what I like to call brain dumping each night before you go to bed. Jot down what's on your mind and then set it aside for tomorrow. We're actually going to practice this technique in a few slides, so hold on to that thought. Here are some great nighttime sleep hygiene tips. The first one we've already mentioned. We talked about keeping our electronic devices off, but I recommend at least if you're going to be on them, turn them off at least 30 minutes before you go to bed. And better yet, I have an idea. Why don't you place your electronics out of reach when you go to bed? That way, if you wake up in the middle of the night, you're less inclined to reach for them if they actually aren't within your reach. Even better than that, I highly recommend keeping your electronic devices out of your bedroom altogether if you can actually manage to do so. I know it's really hard. Unfortunately, the light from those devices can activate and stimulate your brain, and it's very difficult to fall back asleep for several hours sometimes after you've picked up that electronic device. And I'd also like to mention that sometimes, especially in today's pandemic, we might reach for that electronic device at 3 or 4 in the morning when we can't sleep. And we might be reading some really disturbing news that really upsets our ability to sleep in the middle of the night. So that might be another really good reason not to reach for that electronic device in the middle of the night. The next thing I want to talk about is the length of sleep. So earlier, Alice told us that we all need 7 to 9 hours of sleep each night to feel really well rested and to remain healthy. So what you need to do is figure out when you need to be up and then count backwards. It's as simple as that. Do the math. And then don't forget to give yourself a few extra minutes for falling asleep, especially if you're one that might take a few more minutes than others to fall asleep. This next piece of advice is a great piece of advice. If you're not feeling sleepy, don't go to bed. It's as simple as that. If you're not feeling very sleepy and you're feeling very wide awake and wired, go ahead and get out of bed. Especially if you've been laying in bed for 20 minutes, get up, get out of bed, and do something relaxing. So you might want to pick up a book, read a book. You might want to actually walk around the house, tidy up a little bit, nothing strenuous, just kind of walking around easily, or maybe even, taking a bath real quick. Whatever relaxing activity that you might find to just help you relax and get into the mood to go to sleep. And also you might want to journal. So the next one I want to talk about is relaxing and having a nice relaxing bedtime routine. Routine is a really important part of everyone's lives and is a super important part of sleep hygiene. So I highly recommend finding what works for you. For some people, it's taking a bath at night. For some people, it's just as simple as brushing your teeth and throwing on your favorite pair of comfy PJs. Whatever it is that you decide to do, just make sure you do the same thing every night. That way your body knows that it's time to go to sleep, and it'll help wind down as you're getting ready to go to bed. And the next thing is a really good piece of advice as well. Using your bed only for sleep and what I like to call nookie. I actually had a really hard time finding a less offensive word for that. But obviously you guys know that that's those extracurricular activities that you may participate in with your significant other in your bed. That's okay. That's the good news. But don't work in your bed in the daytime. When you're awake, get up, get out of bed. Don't sit in your bed to do any other thing but sleep or nookie. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was environment. And there are so many things you can do for your environment. Unfortunately, for those of you that are listening that work with, do shift work and work evenings or nights, this might be a little harder for you folks. The first thing I want to recommend is make your room relaxing. Make that environment nice and relaxing. Clear it from clutter. It's really hard to fall asleep when the last thing you see before you hop in bed is the complete disastrous mess that you've got on the floor. Not to mention it becomes a walking hazard if you have to get up in the middle of the night to use the restroom. So keep a tidy room. Make sure that room is nice and dark. Great ideas for those night shift workers are using a sleep mask or getting those room darkening shades or curtains. That's always a good idea. What might surprise some of you is we all sleep better in a cooler room. So the recommendations are to keep that room temperature between 60 and 67 degrees Fahrenheit. This really does help you sleep better. And then quiet. Of course, we all know quiet is important when we're trying to fall asleep. Fortunately, again, shift workers have a hard time with this. We also have a hard time with quiet when we're on vacation and when we're on business trips. I don't know about you, but I think that a lot of the times when I'm on a business trip, it seems like I always get stuck next to that noisy elevator all night, or that room next door that they have to be up partying all night long. So I highly recommend turning a fan on in the bathroom. Find whatever white noise that you can find. There are a lot of really great apps that you can put on your smartphone. I personally use an app on there called White Noise, and you can choose whatever white noise works good for you. Make sure your bed is comfortable. Nice, soft pillows and blankets. It is recommended that even if you have a nice quality mattress, that you need to replace your mattress about every 9 to 10 years. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is there's a real growing popularity with the diffusing essential oils at nighttime. And oils such as lavender tend to be very relaxing and very helpful for sleep as well. So if you've picked a couple of things from all of these different tips, think about which ones you might want to try in the next couple of weeks. I recommend just picking one or two and just making a few small changes. And as you make small changes and those are working, then you can add some more to it. If you try all of these things and things are just not working for you, I highly recommend doing a 2-week sleep diary. These diaries can be really, really helpful in tracking what your sleep patterns are. And if you notice on this little 2-week sleep diary, you're making little notations as to when you exercised, when you've had alcohol, when you've taken a nap, things like that. And you can really analyze what your sleep patterns are and maybe actually identify possible triggers that are keeping you awake all night. So these can be really helpful. And then what I want to do real quick, and I really want you to do this tonight before you go to bed. I want you to take 20 minutes to calmly write down a list of all the positive things that happened today. But while we're here today, I just want you to come up with 2. I know we're only halfway through the day, but I'm sure you can come up with 2 really good things that happened today. And then once you write those down, I want you to also think about a couple of maybe negative things that happened today. And you might find this surprising. I don't want you to dwell on those negative things, but I think it's really important to acknowledge that they're there, write them down on a piece of paper, and then move on. Focus on the positive things. Focus on your positive list. Keep that in front of you. Next, I want you to write down your to-do list. All those things that you wanted to get done today, that you maybe didn't get done today. I know we're all super busy. Write those down because your brain is actively thinking about all of those things that you didn't get done. However, if you write a list and then you tell yourself when you're going to deal with any of those outstanding points, I call them unfinished business for the day, write down when you're going to take care of it, whether it be tomorrow, next week, or maybe even next month. But that way your brain knows that you've got a plan to deal with it and it won't stay on your mind. And then the last, let it go. Leave the list next to your bed and then go ahead and try to fall asleep. And then if you wake up in the middle of the night and all of a sudden, you think of something else that you want to write down, go ahead, write it down. That way you kind of empty your brain of that idea, put it down on the list when you're going to do it and go right back to sleep. And these are recommendations that I got from sleepio.com. So Alice and I really wanted to thank you all. We hope you learned something and we hope you have a few items that you can take home with you and try tonight. The Office of the Chief Wellness Officer and Buckeye Wellness also wanted to thank you for attending today. We really look forward to your feedback and appreciate your feedback. If you registered for today, then you will get your feedback in an email version. And all of you YP4Hers that want to get your points, make sure you complete the surveys to get those. And keep in mind, those surveys change every week, so make sure you're keeping up with that on a weekly basis. So for next week's webinar, we have Dr. Kate Golick. She is going to speak to us on physical distancing and loneliness and how to stay socially connected during the pandemic. She's our leadership for the wellness program, and that is going to be on Wednesday, May 6th from 12:30 to 1 p.m. And then we have some resources from Everyday Health. These will be available to you on the website. So you'll be able to click on these and get them. And then also we had our resources for today. And here's our resources that we used for today's lecture. We will have copies of this presentation and they will be posted to the website as well. Did you guys want to go ahead and open up the forums for some question and answer time? And if you're finished with us, have a wonderful day. Stay safe and stay healthy.